ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾನಿಲಯ ಕಾಲೇಜು ಮಂಗಳೂರು. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಕಳೆದ 6 ತಿಂಗಳಿಂದಾಗಿ ಸುಮಾರು 13 ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸ ಸಂಚಿಕೆಗಳನ್ನ ನಡೆಸ್ಕೊಂಡು ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೇವೆ. ಆ 13ನೇ ಸಂಚಿಕೆಯಾಗಿ ಇವತ್ತು ನಾವು ತುಳುನಾಡು ರೀಇಂಟರ್ಪ್ರಿಟಿಂಗ್ ಅರ್ಲಿ ಕಲೋನಿಯಲ್ ಪೀರಿಯಡ್, ತುಳುನಾಡು ಆರಂಭಿಕ ವಸಾಹತುಶಾಹಿ ಕಾಲದ ಮರು ವ್ಯಾಖ್ಯಾನ, ಇದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ಶ್ಯಾಮ್ ಭಟ್ರವರು ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ಶ್ಯಾಮ್ ಭಟ್ರವರು ನಮ್ಮವರೇ, ದಕ್ಷಿಣ ಕನ್ನಡದಿಂದ ಹೋಗಿ ಗೋವಾದಲ್ಲಿ ನೆಲೆಸಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ನನ್ಗೆ ಯಾವಾಗೂ ಸುರೇಂದ್ರ ರಾವ್ ಸರ್ ಇದ್ದಾಗ ಅವ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ರು, ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಅವ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ನಮ್ಗೆ ಒಂದು ಸಣ್ಣ ಪರಿಚಯ ಇದೆ. ಇವತ್ತಿನ ಈ ಒಂದು ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮದ ಅಧ್ಯಕ್ಷತೆಯನ್ನ ನಮ್ಮ ಪೂರ್ವ ಪ್ರಾಂಶುಪಾಲರಾಗಿರುವಂತ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಉದಯ್ ಕುಮಾರ್ ಅವರು ವಹಿಸಿಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಇವರೆಲ್ಲರನ್ನ ಸ್ವಾಗತಿಸಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ ನಾನು ನಮ್ಮ ವಿಭಾಗದ ಮುಖ್ಯಸ್ಥರಾದಂತಹ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಗಣಪತಿ ಅವರ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಕೋರಿಕೊಳ್ತೇನೆ.
ಸರ್ವರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. ಮಂಗಳೂರು ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾನಿಲಯ ಕಾಲೇಜಿನ ಸ್ನಾತಕೋತ್ತರ ಇತಿಹಾಸ ಮತ್ತು ಪುರಾತತ್ವ ಶಾಸ್ತ್ರ ವಿಭಾಗ ನಡೆಸಿಕೊಂಡು ಬಂದಿರತಕ್ಕಂತಹ ಸೆಮಿನಾರ್ ಸೀರೀಸಿನ 13ನೇ ಘಟ್ಟದಲ್ಲಿದ್ದೀವಿ. ಇವತ್ತು ನಾವು 200 ಶ್ರೇಷ್ಠ ವಿದ್ವಾಂಸರನ್ನ ನಮ್ಮ ಶ್ರೋತೃಗಳಿಗೆ ಪರಿಚಯಿಸುವಂಥದ್ದು ಮತ್ತು ಅವರ ಮುಖಾಂತರವಾಗಿ ನಾವು ತುಳುನಾಡಿನ ಇತಿಹಾಸವನ್ನ ತಿಳಿದುಕೊಳ್ಳುವಂತಹ ಒಂದು ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ಕೆ ನಾವು ಇವತ್ತು ಸಜ್ಜಾಗಿದ್ದೀವಿ. ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ಶ್ಯಾಮ್ ಭಟ್ರು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಬಹಳಷ್ಟು ಜನಕ್ಕೆ ಒಂದು ವಿದ್ವತ್ ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರದಲ್ಲಿ ಗೊತ್ತಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥವ್ರು, ಪರಿಚಯ ಇರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥವ್ರು. ಆದರೆ ನಾವು ಇತ್ತೀಚಿನ ಕೆಲವು ವಿದ್ಯಾರ್ಥಿಗಳಿಗೆ ಮತ್ತು ಸಂಶೋಧಕರಿಗೆ ಅವರ ಪರಿಚಯ ಇಲ್ಲದೇನೂ ಇರಬಹುದು. ಆದರೆ ಈ ನಾಡಿನ ಇತಿಹಾಸವನ್ನ ಅರ್ಥಕೊಂಡಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥವ್ರು ಮತ್ತು ಓರ್ವ ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾನಿಲಯದ ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ಆಗಿ ತಮ್ಮ ಸೇವೆಯನ್ನ ನೀಡಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂತಹ ಶ್ಯಾಮ್ ಭಟ್ರವರು ಇವತ್ತು ನಮ್ಮ ಮುಂದಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅವರ ಕುರಿತಾಗಿ ನಾನು ಒಂದು ಸಣ್ಣ ಪ್ರಮಾಣದಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರ ಪರಿಚಯವನ್ನ ತಮಗೆ ಮಾಡಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಇಷ್ಟಪಡ್ತೇನೆ. ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ಶ್ಯಾಮ್ ಭಟ್ರವರು ಮಂಗಳೂರು ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾನಿಲಯ ನಮ್ಮ ಇತಿಹಾಸ ವಿಭಾಗದಲ್ಲಿಯೇ MA ಮುಗಿಸಿ PhD ಪದವಿಯನ್ನ ಪಡ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಇವರು ಕನ್ನಡ, ಇಂಗ್ಲಿಷ್, ತುಳು ಮತ್ತು ಮಲಯಾಳಮನ್ನ ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿ ಮಾತನಾಡಬಲ್ಲಂತವ್ರು, ಬರೆಯಬಲ್ಲಂತವ್ರು, ಅದರ ಮೇಲೆ ವಿದ್ವತ್ ಪೂರ್ಣವಾಗಿ ಯಾವುದೇ ಒಂದು ವಿಷಯವನ್ನ ಮಂಡಿಸುವಂತಹ ಒಂದು ಅಗಾಧ ಭಾಷಾ ಪಾಂಡಿತ್ಯವನ್ನು ಸಹ ಅವರು ಹೊಂದಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಸೊ ಇವರ ಸ್ಪೆಷಲೈಸೇಷನ್ ಇತಿಹಾಸ ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರದಲ್ಲಿ ಮುಖ್ಯವಾಗಿ ಹಿಸ್ಟ್ರಿ ಆಫ್ ಮಾಡರ್ನ್ ಇಂಡಿಯಾ, ಹಿಸ್ಟ್ರಿ ಆಫ್ ಸೌತ್ ಕೆನರಾ, ಎನ್ವಿರಾನ್ಮೆಂಟಲ್ ಹಿಸ್ಟ್ರಿ ಆಫ್ ಇಂಡಿಯಾ ಮತ್ತು ಇಂಡಿಯಾ ಪೋರ್ಚುಗೀಸ್ ಹಿಸ್ಟ್ರಿ, ಈ ವಿಷಯದ ಮೇಲೆ ಇವರು ತಮ್ಮ ವಿಶೇಷ ಪಾಂಡಿತ್ಯವನ್ನ ಗಳಿಸ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅದೇ ರೀತಿ ಪೋರ್ಚುಗೀಸ್ ಲ್ಯಾಂಗ್ವೇಜ್ ನಲ್ಲಿ ಸರ್ಟಿಫಿಕೇಟ್ ಕೋರ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ನು ಕೂಡ ಇವರು ಗಳಿಸ್ಕೊಂಡಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥದ್ದು. ಗೋವಾ ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾಲಯದಲ್ಲಿ ದೀರ್ಘವಾದ 31 ವರ್ಷ ಸೇವೆಯನ್ನ ಇವರು ಪೂರೈಸಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಮುಖ್ಯವಾಗಿ ದಕ್ಷಿಣ ಕನ್ನಡ ಇತಿಹಾಸಕ್ಕೆ ಸಂಬಂಧಿಸಿದಂತೆ 2 ಪುಸ್ತಕಗಳು ಇವರಿಂದ ಬರೆಯಲ್ಪಟ್ಟಿದೆ. 35 ಸಂಶೋಧನಾ ಪತ್ರಿಕೆಗಳು, ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ಎಡಿಟೆಡ್ ಜರ್ನಲ್ಸ್ಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರಕಟಗೊಂಡಿದೆ. ಅದೇ ರೀತಿ 3 ಪ್ರಾಜೆಕ್ಟ್ಸ್ ಗಳನ್ನ, ಒಂದು ಮೇಜರ್ ಪ್ರಾಜೆಕ್ಟ್ಸ್ UGC ಇಂದ, 2 ಮೈನರ್ ಪ್ರಾಜೆಕ್ಟ್ಸ್ ICHR ನಿಂದ ಪಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಅದನ್ನ ಕಂಪ್ಲೀಟ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಮತ್ತು ಗೋವಾ ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾಲಯದ ಪ್ರಾಜೆಕ್ಟ್ ಅನ್ನು ಸಹ ಇವರು ಪೂರೈಸಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಒಟ್ಟು 41 ರಿಸರ್ಚ್ ಪೇಪರ್ ಗಳನ್ನ ಇವರು ಪ್ರೆಸೆಂಟ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅದೇ ರೀತಿ ವಿದ್ಯಾರ್ಥಿಗಳಿಗೆ PhD ವಿದ್ಯಾರ್ಥಿಗಳು ಇವರ ಮಾರ್ಗದರ್ಶನದಲ್ಲಿ ಈಗಾಗಲೇ 7 ಜನ PhD ಯನ್ನ ಪೂರೈಸಿಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ, ಮುಗಿಸಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಇನ್ನು 2 ಜನ ಇನ್ನೂ ಸಹ ಅವರ ಮಾರ್ಗದರ್ಶನದಲ್ಲಿ PhD ಯನ್ನ ಮುಂದುವರಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಇವರು ಪ್ರಿಪರೇಷನ್ ಆಫ್ ಸಿಲೆಬಿ ಅಂಡ್ ಇವ್ಯಾಲ್ಯೂಯೇಷನ್ ವರ್ಕ್ಸ್ ಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ತಮ್ಮನ್ನ ತೊಡಗಿಸಿಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಮತ್ತು ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾಲಯದ ಅಧ್ಯಯನ ಮಂಡಳಿಯ ಸದಸ್ಯರಾಗಿ, ಪರೀಕ್ಷಾ ಮಂಡಳಿಯ ಸದಸ್ಯರಾಗಿ, ಅಧ್ಯಕ್ಷರಾಗಿ ಕೆಲಸವನ್ನ ನಿರ್ವಹಿಸಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಮತ್ತು ಫಾರಿನ್ ವಿಸಿಟ್ ಮಾಡಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥದ್ದು, ಮುಖ್ಯವಾಗಿ ಪೋರ್ಚುಗಲ್ಗೆ 1996ರಲ್ಲಿ ವಿಸಿಟ್ ಮಾಡುವುದರೊಂದಿಗೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿಯ ಇತಿಹಾಸದ ಕುರಿತು, ಹೆಚ್ಚಿನ ಜ್ಞಾನವನ್ನ ಸಂಪಾದಿಸಿಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ಅಕಾಡೆಮಿಗಳ ಮೆಂಬರ್ಶಿಪ್ ಅನ್ನ ಪಡೆದುಕೊಂಡಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥದ್ದು. ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಮುಖ್ಯವಾಗಿ ಇಂಡಿಯನ್ ಹಿಸ್ಟರಿ ಕಾಂಗ್ರೆಸ್ ಇರಬಹುದು, ಸೌತ್ ಇಂಡಿಯನ್ ಹಿಸ್ಟರಿ ಕಾಂಗ್ರೆಸ್, ಕರ್ನಾಟಕ ಹಿಸ್ಟರಿ ಕಾಂಗ್ರೆಸ್, ಇದರ ಎಲ್ಲ ಅಜೀವ ಸದಸ್ಯತ್ವವನ್ನ ಪಡೆದುಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಸರ್ ಅನ್ನ ಈ ಮೂಲಕವಾಗಿ ನಾನು ತಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲರ ಪರವಾಗಿ ಸ್ವಾಗತಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೇನೆ. ಸರ್, ತಮಗೆ ಹಾರ್ದಿಕವಾಗಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಸ್ವಾಗತ. ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮ 13ನೇ ಕಂತು ಸತತವಾಗಿ ಮಾನುಷದ ಜತೆಗೂಡಿ ನಡೀತಾ ಇರತಕ್ಕಂಥದ್ದು. ಈ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮದ ಅಧ್ಯಕ್ಷತೆಯನ್ನ ಇಂದು ನಮ್ಮ ಕಾಲೇಜಿನ ಪೂರ್ವತನ ಪ್ರಾಂಶುಪಾಲರಾಗಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಉದಯ್ ಕುಮಾರ್ ಅವರು ವಹಿಸಿಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಸೊ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಉದಯ್ ಕುಮಾರ್ ಅವರು ಓರ್ವ ಕ್ರಿಯಾಶೀಲ ವ್ಯಕ್ತಿತ್ವದವರು. ತಮ್ಮ ಪ್ರಾಂಶುಪಾಲರಾಗಿದ್ದಂತ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ಎಲ್ಲ ಕಾಲೇಜಿನ ಸರ್ವಾಂಗೀಣ ಅಭಿವೃದ್ಧಿಗೆ ಅವರು ತಮ್ಮನ್ನ ತಾವು ತೊಡಗಿಸಿಕೊಂಡಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥವ್ರು ಮತ್ತು ಇಂಥ ಒಂದು ಸಾಹಿತ್ಯ ಪರ ಚಟುವಟಿಕೆಗಳು ಮತ್ತು ಇತಿಹಾಸ ಪರ ಚಟುವಟಿಕೆಗಳಿಗೆ ಅವರು ಹೆಚ್ಚಿನ ಆಸಕ್ತಿ ಹೊಂದಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಸರ್, ನಿಮ್ಮನ್ನು ಕೂಡ ಈ ಮೂಲಕವಾಗಿ ಹಾರ್ದಿಕವಾಗಿ ಸ್ವಾಗತಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೇನೆ. ನಮ್ಮ ತುಳುನಾಡು ಇತಿಹಾಸದ ಕುರಿತಂತೆ ಮುಖ್ಯವಾಗಿ ಮಾನುಷದ ಅಧ್ಯಕ್ಷರು, ಮಾನುಷದ ಕಾರ್ಯದರ್ಶಿಗಳು, ಪದಾಧಿಕಾರಿಗಳು ಇದರಲ್ಲಿ ಭಾಗವಹಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅವರ ಒಂದು ಸಹಕಾರವನ್ನ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಸ್ಮರಿಸ್ತಾ ಅವರೆಲ್ಲರನ್ನು ಕೂಡ ನಾನು ಈ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ಹಾರ್ದಿಕವಾಗಿ ಸ್ವಾಗತಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೇನೆ. ಸ್ನೇಹಿತರಾಗಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಸಿದ್ದರಾಜು ಅವರು ಮತ್ತು ಜರ್ನಲಿಸಂ ವಿಭಾಗದ ಶ್ರೀ ಗುರುಪ್ರಸಾದ್ ಅವರು, ಇವರ ಸೇವೆಯನ್ನ ನಾನು ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಸ್ಮರಿಸ್ತಾ ಸರ್ ತಮಗೂ ಕೂಡ ಹಾರ್ದಿಕವಾಗಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಸ್ವಾಗತವನ್ನ ಬಯಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೇನೆ. ಈ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ನಮ್ಮ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮದ ಯಶಸ್ವಿಗೆ ಬೆನ್ನೆಲುಬಾಗಿ ಇರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥವರು ನಮ್ಮ ವಿಭಾಗದ ಅಧ್ಯಾಪಕ ವೃಂದದವರು ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಜಯರಾಜ್, ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಕುಮಾರಸ್ವಾಮಿ, ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಮೀನಾಕ್ಷಿ, ರಂಜಿತ್ ಮತ್ತು ರತನ್ ಮತ್ತು ಶ್ರೀಮತಿ ಕವಿತಾ, ಇವರನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ನಾನು ಈ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ನೆನೆಸ್ಕೊಳ್ತಾ ಅವರ ಸಹಾಯವನ್ನ ಇನ್ನೊಮ್ಮೆ ಸ್ಮರಿಸ್ತಾ ತಮಗೆಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ ಹಾರ್ದಿಕವಾಗಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಸ್ವಾಗತ. ಈ ಒಂದು ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮದಲ್ಲಿ ಭಾಗವಹಿಸಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಎಲ್ಲ ಅಧ್ಯಾಪಕ ವೃಂದದವರಿಗೂ, ಇತಿಹಾಸದ ಆಸಕ್ತರಿಗೂ ಮತ್ತು ವಿದ್ಯಾರ್ಥಿ ವೃಂದದವರಿಗೂ ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ ಮತ್ತೊಮ್ಮೆ ಸ್ವಾಗತವನ್ನ ಬಯಸ್ತಾ ತುಳುನಾಡು ಆರಂಭಿಕ ವಸಾಹತು ಕಾಲದ ಮರು ವ್ಯಾಖ್ಯಾನ ಈ ಕುರಿತಾಗಿ ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ಶ್ಯಾಮ್ ಭಟ್ ರವರು ತಮ್ಮ ವಿಶೇಷ ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸವನ್ನ ನೀಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ ತಮಗೆ ಮತ್ತೊಮ್ಮೆ ಕೇಳ್ಕೊಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೇನೆ. ಸರ್, ತಮಗೆ ಸ್ವಾಗತ.
Respected President for this webinar and all other esteemed colleagues who have joined this webinar this evening. Good evening to all of you. I am very happy to participate in this webinar organized by the Mangalore University College, Department of PG Studies in History and Archaeology in association with Manusha. I am thankful to the organizers at the University College Mangalore and also all the office bearers of the Manusha for giving me this opportunity to talk to all of you. When we speak of South Canara during the colonial period, or for that matter during the pre-colonial period or even after the colonial times, the geographical definition becomes rather important because the geography or geographical limits extent of the district has been changing over a period of time, that is during different rulers and administration. So when I speak of South Canara during the colonial period, what I intend to say is the following areas: present Dakshina Kannada district, present Udupi district excluding the Kundapura Taluk, present Kasaragod district, the Amindivi Islands which was part of South Canara during the early colonial period. Kundapura Taluk was in North Canara up to 1860. The Puttur and Amarasulya regions were with Coorg from 1804 to 1834. So this is roughly the area or geographical extent that was covered by South Canara or Dakshina Kannada during the early colonial period. That is to say, from 1799-1800 to about 1850s or rather 1860. Now, when we speak of local history or regional history, it is very important to keep in mind the developments at the national level. In other words, local history or regional history has to be understood and analyzed in the context of the nation or historical developments and historical explanations available at the level of the nation state. This is very important to understand local history or regional history in a larger perspective. It is also needed for a better understanding of both the histories, that is local history or regional history on the one hand and national history on the other. Because these two types of histories are complementary to each other. One supplements the other. So if we have details about different localities or regions in the country, then definitely it helps historians or scholars who work on the national history. At the same time, when there are interpretations or explanations in the national history, such explanations could be borrowed, used positively while studying local or regional histories. This kind of approach is also required to avoid local or regional exaggerations or glorifications, particularly of individuals who had played a key role in the making of history, and also historical events, be it political, social, or economic. It is always better to have a historical paradigm, a historical model, a pattern for explaining the past of a region or of a locality, and the historical perspective or perception or approach that are available at the national level. They become very handy, they become useful, and they become very important in understanding. I would like to draw the attention of all the participants in this webinar to the famous debate that is before us in Indian history, that is the debate on 18th century India. I am not going into the details of this debate because it is too huge, and also at this point of time I am not really prepared to speak on that also. But to make a reference to the debate is very important in this context, as I would like to draw some ideas from the debate that has been going on the second half of the 18th century India. The debate on 18th century India has two parts. First, relating to the early half of the 18th century, and the second to the later half of the 18th century. First half relates to the disintegration of the Mughal Empire and the rise of regional powers. The debate basically revolves around the issue of dark age versus prosperity, or it revolves around the issue of disintegration of the Mughal Empire and the rise of regional powers. whether it was a dark age, a period of disintegration, whether there was decline, or whether there was a prosperity, regional prosperity, emergence of regional powers, etc., constitute the crux of this debate. Second half centers around the rise of the English power in Bengal and the rest of India and the changes that came about. The historical contention or debate is surrounding the issue of continuity versus change. So we know that the second half of the 18th century, particularly after 1757, the Battle of Plassey, saw the rise of the English power or the British power in India. So the rise of the English to power in Bengal and the other parts, their administration or their conquest, and then the changes that came about, and in those changes, whether there was continuity or whether there was change, whether it marked a complete break from the past, or whether the English just replaced the Mughals without introducing many changes. This constitutes the subject matter of this debate. We have a large number of historians, both in India and abroad, who have contributed to this debate on 18th century India. In fact, historiographically speaking, it was a kind of cornucopia, a subject on which much has been written. Many contradictory views are available. There are differences of viewpoints before us. And I have just mentioned a few names here, like that of Sir Jaduna Sarkar, Atar Ali, Satish Chandra, Irfan Habib, Mustafa Alam, Om Prakash, Chetan Singh, Rajat Datta, C.A. Bailey, J.F. Richards, and many, many more. The list is really big, and I am not really going into that. But I have just made a reference to two important names of historians here. One is that of Irfan Habib, who advocates the thesis of change. Now I am referring to the second half of the 18th century, 1750 or 1757 onwards, let us say to 1800. Change, discontinuity, far-reaching consequences, and effects which molded and changed the structure of the Indian economy in the second half of the 18th century. I have written there as 19th century. It should be 18th century. I am sorry for the mistake. Second half of the 18th century during the British rule. So Irfan Habib argues that the British takeover of India or certain parts of India during the second half of the 18th century marked a sea change, a total departure from the past. And the colonial control, the colonial administration, the changes that they had brought in, all these resulted in far-reaching changes in all spheres, and particularly the economic sphere. So I am taking his name just as a representative of all those other historians who argue that there was discontinuity, there were many changes in the second half of the 18th century. Another name that I would like to refer is that of C.A. Bailey, Christopher Bailey, who argues around the continuity thesis, just the opposite of what Professor Irfan Habib has been arguing, that there were no structural changes. The British stepped into the shoes of the Mughals, and the colonial project or the British project was something which came about not just because of the efforts of the British. There also was the participation of Indians, and it was a kind of Indo-British project. And there were many continuities, though there were certain changes in politics, administration, etc. There were many changes in terms of culture, in terms of art, architecture, economy, etc. So after making a brief reference to the debate as to whether there was continuity or change, I am borrowing this model or this paradigm or this historical approach that these historians have used to explain the historical details of the second half of the 18th century to that of South Canara of the early 19th century. So for the purpose of this lecture or webinar, I am of the view that we can borrow and follow, with the caution of course, the debate of the second half of the 18th century India in the context of the first half of the 19th century colonial South Canara. So what India saw in the later half of the 18th century in certain parts of the country was witnessed by South Canara in the early half of the 19th century, because the historical context or circumstances were the same. There it happened, let us say, 50 years before. Here it happened 50 years later. The indigenous power was overthrown and the English established their supremacy. Only the century was different. So after making a reference to the debate on 18th century and saying that the second half of the 18th century debate could be utilized by us positively to explain certain very important details of early 19th century South Canara, I am coming to the subject proper now: early colonial South Canara, continuity and change. So I am speaking about continuity and change, particularly from the point of view of reinterpretation of the historical details that were presented so far. The English occupied Canara in 1799 after the fall of Tipu Sultan, and the province of Canara and Sunda was merged with the Madras Presidency. That we were under the Madras Presidency. So southern division of Canara represented South Canara. The province of Canara and Sunda, in that the southern division was called as South Canara by us for a historical explanation. Now I am straight away coming to the point of continuity. Though there were many changes that could be listed and explained during the early half of the 19th century in the history of South Canara, there existed areas of continuity also. A couple of examples are provided below. What I have studied, what I have seen from records, and what is already available before the world of scholarship, that I am trying to present in a different way in this context. So first important continuity that we could see is that of the system of private property in the form of Moola and the Raitwari system of revenue administration introduced by Sir Thomas Munro. Now, I have to tell you a little bit more about the system of private property, what manifested in this region in the form of Moola. Private property and hereditary proprietary right over the soil was the characteristic feature of land ownership in South Canara. It was called Moola, a practice or a system long cherished by the natives. So when this system came into being, is still an enigma. Some references are there, at least to say that it originated somewhere in the 14th century, but still we do not exactly know when it originated. Maybe further research and maybe further search in the form of records or other sources could help us. The Mula Vargadar enjoyed hereditary and transferable property in the soil. Mula is from the Sanskrit word mool, signifying the root of a tree or origin of a family. Varga in Sanskrit signifying a leaf or leaf account of revenue, and in course of time came to denote the holding for which the account was kept. In other words, Mula Varga, together the word signified hereditary proprietary right over the soil. So not only the Rayat or the landholder was the owner of that land, he had a hereditary right over that piece of land. Sir Thomas Munro, the first collector of the province, was much impressed and astonished to see the system of private property that was deep rooted in the region. This particular statement that I am making is just one sentence here. But then if we go through the administrative records in the archives, which I had an opportunity to see in the Tamil Nadu State Archives located at Egmore, page after page and volumes after volume, and for many years, not only Munro, but even his successors had repeatedly referred to the system of Mula Varga in the region. Munro was particularly impressed and astonished to see the system of private property that was deep rooted in the region. We all know that private property was not just that existed in South Canara only. It existed in the other parts of the country also and was known by different names. This feature had attracted him so much that he repeatedly expressed his opinion about it in his reports to the authorities of the Board of Revenue at Madras. So in all the letters that Munro had written as collector to the authorities of the Board of Revenue at Madras, we could see reference to the system of Mula Varga. According to Munro, the lands in South Canara constituted a sort of private property more ancient and probably more perfect than that of England. So he says there also it existed, here also it existed, but he was just alarmed to see the kind of system that existed and the kind of attachment that people had to that piece of land. Munro was against the Cornwallis system, the permanent settlement or the zamindari system of land revenue administration. He did not want that to be introduced here. The salient feature of Munro's revenue policy was the acceptance of the existing institutions as he found them, as far as possible, without any alterations. So I want to emphasize this particular sentence to say that Munro's revenue policy was the acceptance of the existing institutions as he found them. So here we can see how Munro had insisted that the existing system or practice or institution had to continue. He found in South Canara a widely established system of private property in land, well cherished and valued by the people. His idea was not to supersede it by any new system, but to restore and strengthen it. He may also have thought that it would help him win the goodwill of the natives. This is generally what we say about any administration, that something which is beneficial to the people, something which they had followed so far, something which is in their interest, if the administration or the ruler follows, definitely he is going to earn the goodwill of the people. So it was his administrative acumen that made him to, follow this. We could say that also. Perhaps that factor also must have played a very important role. We cannot deny that. But he could not find here many big zamindars or the allodial gentry, the zamindars, kind of zamindars that Cornwallis Bengal could see or had. Allodial gentry which the continuation of the Cornwallis Bengal policy required. Before Munro left Canara, he received orders from the Board of Revenue at Madras to submit proposals to divide the region into large estates. But he was opposed to it because the Madras government wanted to introduce the Cornwallis system of revenue administration here. But Munro repeatedly told them that it was not possible to introduce the permanent settlement here as it was done in Bengal. Here, what suited best was the Rayatwari system. However, before Munro left, he had submitted a proposal to introduce the permanent settlement. By that time, the authorities also realized that it was not a good proposal and they also dropped it. Munro said, private property in Canara was derived from gift or purchase or descent from an antiquity too remote to be traced. So he also says when this originated, he was not able to say. These title deeds had probably stood more trials than all the estates in England. People were ready to go to the court of law. They were ready to fight. And today also we see that for the purpose of property, there have been many suits, litigations, and it is a prized commodity. These title deeds had probably stood more trials than all the estates in England. So he said, dividing Canara into great estates would only be attempting to carry it backwards a century or two and forcing it from that state, from that condition to which it must inevitably return. So if we introduce great estates, once again we will be forced to come back to the idea of small estates. Munro wanted to introduce a revenue system which would suit the local conditions. Therefore, the land revenue system which Munro introduced in South Canara was in its leading principles Rayatwari in character. Leading principles we say. Rayatwari we have put within inverted commas, within quotes, because the Rayatwari system also, the way in which it was introduced, strictly speaking, was not a settlement with the Rayats. Because the Rayats in many cases, or at least in few cases, they were landlords, they were zamindars, they were really big estate holders. Some of them had 200 or 300 acres of land. They never cultivated the land by themselves. So it was a settlement with the actual landowners or Mulavargadars. But in theory, on paper, the system that was introduced was the Rayatwari system, and it was an agreement or settlement with the actual landowners or what was known as the Mulavargadars, who paid the assessment direct to the government without intermediaries. So I am saying about this Rayatwari system here only to emphasize the point that there existed the Mulavarga system, let us say for many centuries before Munro came in, and then the English had to introduce the Rayatwari system and they were not able to continue with the Cornwallis system or permanent settlement of land revenue administration here. This I am identifying or emphasizing as a very important point of continuity that existed during the early colonial period. Of course, it continued subsequently also. Along with this, when we speak of the land revenue administration, land measurement is a very important aspect of this administration. Same way, assessment is also a very important component of the system. The Bijavari system of land measurement. Bijavari means the quantum of seed required to be sown in a particular field. So if I have a piece of land, generally I call that as ಇದು ಒಂದು ಮುಡಿ ಗದ್ದೆ, ಇದು ಎರಡು ಮುಡಿ ಗದ್ದೆ, ಇದು ಅರ್ಧ ಮುಡಿ ಗದ್ದೆ. So like this, even today, if we go to the villages or in some parts of the district, the senior members in the villages would speak of ಒಂದು ಮುಡಿ ಗದ್ದೆ, ಎರಡು ಮುಡಿ ಗದ್ದೆ in this fashion. They will not say this is 1 acre land, 2 acres of land, though they may know today that it is 1 acre or 2 acres. Because the Bijavari system of land measurement existed earlier, before Munro came, before the British came, and during the British period it continued. Land measurement continued for many more decades. Because land-based survey system, land survey system, scientific measurement of land did not come into being during this period. Though there are references and a few parts were surveyed during this early part of the 19th century, they could not complete and they did not take it seriously, and that happened only subsequently in the case of South Canara also. So Bijavari system of land measurement was a rough and ready system of land measurement that was available to the British. While introducing the land revenue system, it was used for land measurement, it was used for land assessment, and it was not at all scientific. Also, one mura of paddy, for example, when we say how many seers for one mura, also differed from region to region. It was not that in all parts of South Canara, one mura of paddy had a certain specific number of seers of paddy. In certain parts it was 35 seers. In certain other parts it was 40 seers. In certain other parts it was 48 seers of corn. So the mura was also not a unit that could be depended upon for the entire district or region for land measurement. It was something that was available, which more or less specified the extent of a particular field held by a particular rayat or peasant. So when the settlement was made based on the Bijavari system and revenue assessment was made based on that measurement, naturally it was a very rough assessment. It was not a very scientific assessment. And in many cases, it was much more than what should have been collected from that peasant or rayat. And also it differed from region to region. So there were many irregularities in terms of land measurement and land assessment, and also anomalies in terms of these functions of land revenue administration. But the point that I want to emphasize here, keeping away the kind of demerits that the system had, that the Bijavari system, which was available to them readily, was made use of by them positively for many more decades, and that existed during the century, and that exists today also in practice. This is one important example that I wanted to give as far as continuity was concerned. Another important example is related to judiciary and police, or we can say judicial and police administration. They are related to each other in this context. The Judicial Commission, 1814 to 1818, the period of the commission. However, by 1816, Munro, who was the head of the commission, submitted his report with regard to the reforms that had to be introduced in the field of judiciary in the Madras Presidency. Judicial Commission headed by Munro, along with other members, George Stratton was another important member, argued that the Jilla judges had hardly an opportunity to acquire an intimate knowledge of the people as they were confined to their headquarters. What happened was that up to this point of time, let us say up to 1816, from 1800 to 1816, the Jilla judge also was looking after the magisterial functions and also the police functions. But Munro was opposed to that clubbing of these functions. He argued that judges hardly any opportunity to acquire an intimate knowledge of the people as they were confined to their headquarters. It reported that such a knowledge could be had, it means the Judicial Commission reported that such a knowledge about the villages, knowledge about the people could be had only by the collectors because they frequently toured the districts in pursuance of their revenue duties. Collector had to manage the revenue administration, so he had to go to the districts, he had to go to the taluks, he had to go to the villages. He was well conversant with the geographical details of that place. It further suggested the transfer of police and magisterial powers from the judge to the collector. So commission said the police duties and the magisterial powers had to be transferred from the judge to the collector. But this idea of Munro was not initially accepted by the Governor's Council, means the Governor's office at Madras and his council did not borrow this idea of Munro. They were opposed to it. Governor's Council accepted the idea of transferring to the collector only the superintendence and control of the police. They were willing to give the police functions or duties or the police department to the collector, but not that of the magistrate. It was opposed to giving the magistrate's power to the collector. Why? Because it did not want to unite the executive and judicial powers in opposition to the whole basis of the Cornwallis tradition. So the Bengal tradition, the Cornwallis tradition of administration, in which they wanted to keep the judiciary separate from the executive, the independence of the judiciary, they wanted to maintain. But Munro was against it because of his own reason, as explained above. It did not want to unite the executive and judicial powers in opposition to the whole basis of the Cornwallis tradition. So you must understand that the tradition in Bengal was one thing and the tradition in Madras Presidency was another. To the Madras government, the commissioners reiterated the general case for transferring the office of magistrate entirely to the collector. Commissioners headed by Munro once again reiterated, they tried to argue and re-argue and convince that there was a general reason, general case for transferring the office of the magistrate entirely to the collector. On the subject of native police, the Court of Directors appreciatively noted Munro's views about the hereditary village watch. I have made this bold, hereditary village watch. So once again we are going back to pre-1799 system, which Munro wanted to bring back or continue during his regime and later. So Munro's views about the hereditary village watch constituting an adequate as well as acceptable form of local policing. Therefore, they suggested the transfer of police and magisterial duties from the Jilla judge to the collector. So Court of Directors were agreeing with Munro's idea. Governor's Council was not agreeing, but in the meantime something else happened. That was a development in the Coimbatore district of the Madras Presidency, and that development favored Munro's argument. And that was a case known as the Kasi Setti case. In other words, Kasi Setti was a clerk in the treasury, in the revenue department in Coimbatore. And he had amassed huge wealth. And he had involved in illegal and corrupt practices. And there was a commission set up, and in February 1816, commission submitted its report and found out that Kasi Setti was the key man in that abuses called as the Coimbatore abuses, or what is popularly called as the Kasi Setti scandal, or it is also known as the Coimbatore cabal of corruptions. So Kasi Setti case showed the Madras government that whatever administration that they had followed until that time was inefficient. It was not serving the purpose that had before it, and it influenced them to accept the idea of Munro that the collector, if magisterial powers were given to him, could maintain law and order and also help in bringing down corruption in administration. So finally, in September 1816, 7 regulations were promulgated by the Madras government, implementing the recommendations made by the Judicial Commission. Thus, the superintendents of the police and magisterial duties were transferred from the Jilla judge to the collector. So until 1816, the Jilla judge was performing magisterial work and the police duties. Now these two were removed from the Jilla judge. So police and magisterial duties were removed from the Jilla judge. He had to perform only the work of the judge, sitting in his office, ably supported by all his subordinates, various courts below him and above him. But the collector had 3 important functions. One was that of the collector, second was that of the magistrate, and third was that of looking after the police department or police administration. Thus, the revenue, police, and magisterial powers were with the collector. Henceforth, the collector was designated as the collector and the magistrate. So, in all the correspondence of the district, from now onwards, 1816 onwards, we will see he will sign as the collector and the magistrate. So in framing the regulations, Munro and George Stratton, his fellow commissioner, endeavored to adopt them as far as possible to the manners and institutions of the people for whose use they were intended. So here, perhaps if we can borrow the idea of utilitarianism, somewhere the idea of utilitarianism could be traced, but the idea was that the system introduced by them to be useful to the people. And we must understand, when we read Munro, when we try to understand Munro's administration, his reforms were always liberal. He wanted to support the natives, the inhabitants, be it revenue administration, be it judiciary or police. Munro always was favorable to the Indians. He was to increase their services. He was to increase their salaries. And we could see that his whole approach was liberal in terms of administration. As far as possible, the system should suit the manners and institutions of the people for whose use they were intended, wrote T.H. Beaglehole. Who wrote on Sir Thomas Munro? Munro strongly advocated the continuation of the rough and ready native system of police administration. So the system of policing that was available to them, the role played by the village watchmen, the kind of law and order that they maintained, all these had to be continued. Administration with some changes rather than introducing wholesome changes or wholesale changes. Thus, the old police system of village watchmen, mostly hereditary in nature, continued. So here, both judiciary and police are involved because the powers of the judges were rather trimmed and the magisterial and police powers were given to the collector. And the judge could concentrate more on the cases and mostly he decided criminal cases, of course, along with that civil case. Collector and magistrate mostly decided civil cases with the help of the sub any other officials who were there below him. So I have identified two important areas of administration. One is revenue, the other is judiciary and police, though they are different. For this purpose, I am clubbing them. We could go into the details of both. And I have published a small work on judiciary and police, where certain details which I have presented are available. But one could go into the details further, minutely, in these two areas. Now, this is about continuity. So, when I have stated continuity, it is not that I am trying to argue as C.A. Bailey or other Cambridge historians have argued that the English only stepped into the shoes of the Mughals, or English stepped into the shoes of the other local rulers here in South Canara. Definitely there were changes. But when we describe these changes, somewhere the continuities that existed during the colonial period, they somewhere go into the oblivion, and they are not sufficiently explained. And my whole purpose in speaking today is to say that this could also be a kind of approach that could be profitably made use of to follow a balanced approach in the study of this region. So after stating two examples for continuity, I would make a brief reference to the changes. Changes are, of course, more well known because all the writers who have written during the colonial period, explaining about colonialism, nationalism, or colonialism as a challenge, nationalism as a response, or a kind of clash between tradition and modernity. All the historians, whether they were nationalists, whether they were Marxists, or whether they were subalterns, they always have highlighted the kind of changes that came about during the colonial period. So most important change was the political authority changed. Alien rule came into being, foreign rule came into being. Hitherto, though foreigners came into being, in a way they got Indianized. In other words, the word Hinduist is also used, Hinduist or Indianized. But the British were not Indianized. Rather, they became the agents of change. We became the subjects of change. So it was a very important change. It was a big change, sea change. That itself was a very important change to be noted in Indian history or even in the history of South Canara. There began discrimination when the alien rulers came into being. They discriminated against us in polity, in economy, in society, in culture, in terms of race, in all areas. There existed exploitation. There existed political colonialism and cultural colonialism. So I especially brought in cultural colonialism into being because we can simply, bring in the idea of Rudyard Kipling, for example. Now we were like birds who were caught by them in their cages, and the kind of cultural changes that they wanted to bring about, and a kind of replica of what culture existed there, they wanted to create here in India or in the region. So all these definitely was a big loss to the Indians, to us, and they meant big changes. Now, in the case of South Canara, as it existed in other parts also, tobacco monopoly existed 1803 to 1852. So any cultivator had to obtain license. He had to sell the tobacco cultivated by him to their officials. He had to sell that to them, take the receipt from them. So a lot of restrictions. Salt monopoly, we know the history of salt, the kind of movement against salt monopoly, how it became a big issue during the period of Gandhiji. So it is a very big issue. Land revenue and other sources of revenue. I just made a reference to Rayatwari system earlier. Rayatwari system also had many drawbacks. It led to impoverishment of land. It led to rural indebtedness. It led to emergence of merchant money lenders. It changed the agrarian relations. It led to transfer of land. It led to mortgage of land. On the whole, it led to various miseries as far as the people who depended on cultivation were concerned. Other sources of revenue, at least about more than 50 heads of revenue, other than land revenue, be it on artisans, on barbers, on merchants, various types of sources of revenue we can speak of. Then a very important change was collection of revenue only in cash and not in cash or kind as existed earlier. Because paying only in cash had a great implication on the people. Because people found it very difficult to pay the share of the state, revenue share, and other taxes, of course. Revenue share was almost as high as 50% of the gross produce. It varied depending upon the type of land. And when the farmers were poor, naturally they had to sell the crop soon after the harvest. And when the supply was more, definitely the price was less in the market. And they had to shell out large quantities of their produce and could realize very less cash, with the help of which they had to pay the revenue share of the state. Also, there was a big drawback in terms of market price and Jamabandi price. Jamabandi price was the settlement, the land revenue settlement price. Market price was the price that the farmers would get when they sell their produce in the market. Many times, because of depression, because of economic slowdown, it happened that the Jamabandi price was higher than the market price. And as a result, the farmers had to sell almost everything that they had produced to pay the revenue share of the state. So like this, there were problems that existed in the administration. Survey of land was absent. So I told rough and ready system, Vijayavari system, which had its own drawback. Some attempts were made, but during this period, survey of land was not taken up seriously, and it was taken up to some extent in the later half of the century. Judiciary, important changes came into being with regard to judicial administration, starting from Madras, where the Supreme Court existed, the Court of Circuit, then the High Court here, the Judges Court, then the lower courts, gradation of courts and authorities. And then, of course, law, the Hindu law, Muslim law. Then the police system, laws governing that, various officials, hierarchy therein again. Civil service, as introduced by Cornwallis in the north. And then, of course, during this period here, civil servants became very important. Law came into being. Though on paper they said equality of law and equal protection of law, we all know that never existed. Judiciary, police, civil service, law, all these are considered as the backbone of the colonial administration. In other words, they were the basic pillars of administration. In fact, the civil service was called as the steel frame of the British colonial administration in India. In other words, all these constituted the arms of the state: civil service, law, police, judiciary. They were the arms of the state. And in all these areas, there were changes. We can go on and on telling about these changes and how colonialism resulted in far-reaching changes and how it affected India and Indians, and how these changes themselves were responsible, of course, along with other reasons, for the rise of national consciousness and growth of the freedom movement in course of time. So after stating two examples for continuity and stating something about changes, about which many of us know, there are large number of works that are available on South Canara. When I worked for my PhD for the colonial period, what was available was John Starrick's manual and Stuart's work, Starrick and Stuart. Then, of course, before me, I could see Dr. Karunakara's thesis, which was on socio-economic condition in South Canara, of course, covered a long period. In fact, I remember meeting him when he was the principal of Government College Upinagadi, when I was a research student. So I had no much of thesis as such to bank upon when I started my research. But the original documents, administrative documents, primary documents, I must say, at the archives became very handy. And I could do my studies based on that. But after I submitted, many others have worked in Mangalore University and also in other universities. Mangalore University, many of my juniors of the subsequent batches had undertaken research and were also successfully awarded PhD. And today, therefore, luckily, we have large number of theses available on South Canara, modern South Canara, which could be easily used by readers and scholars alike. So thanks to Mangalore University and also to the other universities nearby, like for example, Kannur University or Calicut University, from where I had a few theses for evaluation, but they were on South Canara and on Kasaragod regions. So after stating all these, so I am not going into the scholars who have worked. Some of them, I am sure, are participants in this webinar. So I conclude here by saying that both continuities and changes existed. This revisionist historical approach. So I am not saying that we should bank upon only on the Marxist approach, as Professor Irfan Habib has advocated, Marxist approach, along with the earlier approaches, let us say the Cambridge historical approach. Both these approaches help us understand history better, historical happenings better. It throws light on certain specific areas which were not examined thoroughly or relatively sidelined in the larger scene of depicting or writing colonial history and its implications from certain historical perspectives. So the kind of historiography that is available on 18th century India, if we speak of Marxist historiography, they ignore certain aspects. If we speak of Cambridge historiography, they ignore certain other aspects. So I would suggest, as a researcher, that it is better to read both and perhaps draw positive elements from both and try to implement them in our historical understanding. Though colonialism led to revolutionary changes, underdevelopment, rural indebtedness, etc., there were certain historical continuities in terms of practices, institutions, and cultural traits. So, I want to emphasize the point that colonialism definitely resulted in far reaching changes. But during the period of the colonial regime, certain tendencies, certain practices, certain traits, certain customs and traditions that existed earlier, they continued. Maybe they changed during the course of history or over a period of time. But initially, or at least for certain years, such continuities definitely existed, and they are not enough studied in the existing historiographical works. There was no one pattern of change or continuity characterizing the century. So, characterizing the 18th century India, in the same way characterizing 19th century South Canada. Both need to be addressed. Means changes and continuities both need to be addressed. There was not just one pattern of continuity only, one pattern of change only, and somewhere a middle path has to be followed. And all the writings that are available, if read, understood, and used properly, may help us in having a better understanding of our own local history or regional history. With this, once again, I thank the organizers, particularly the organizers at Mangalore University College, Mangalore, the principal of the college, then all the others from the Department of History and Archaeology who were actively involved in organizing this webinar series, and all the office bearers and organizers of the Manusha, and all those who have participated in this session. A big thank you to all.
Thank you, sir. I congratulate you to present such a beautiful paper with a depth study. I request now all the participants can ask their questions, if any.
ಇದು ಯಾವುದೇ ಒಂದು ಆಡಳಿತ ಬದಲಾದಾಗ ಟೋಟಲ್ ಕಂಟಿನ್ಯೂಟಿ ಟೋಟಲ್ ಚೇಂಜ್ ಇರ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಕೆಲವು ವಿಷಯಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಕಂಟಿನ್ಯೂಟಿ ಇರ್ತದೆ, ಕೆಲವು ವಿಷಯಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಚೇಂಜ್ ಇರುವಂತಹದ್ದು ಅನಿವಾರ್ಯ. ಅದು ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಅಷ್ಟು ದೊಡ್ಡ ಒಂದು ಡಿಬೇಟಿನ ವಿಷಯ ಇದರಲ್ಲಿ ಏನು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ ನನ್ನ ಒಂದು ಸೀಮಿತ ಜ್ಞಾನಕ್ಕೆ ನನಗೆ ಅದು ಅರ್ಥ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಏನೇ ಇದ್ರೂ ಕೂಡ ಶ್ಯಾಮ್ ಭಟ್ರು ಬಹಳ ಒಳ್ಳೆ ರೀತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಕೆಲವು ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಆದಂತಹ ಬದಲಾವಣೆಗಳು ಮತ್ತು ಕೆಲವು ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಆದಂತಹ ಕಂಟಿನ್ಯೂಟಿ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಬಹಳ ಸೂಕ್ತವಾದಂತಹ ಮಾಹಿತಿಯನ್ನು ನೀಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅವರಿಗೆ ಕೃತಜ್ಞತೆಗಳನ್ನು ಹೇಳಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಬಯಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೇನೆ.
ಸರ್, ನಂದು ಒಂದು ಸಣ್ಣ ಡೌಟ್ ಸರ್, ಏನಂದ್ರೆ ದಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಆಸ್ ಯು ಸೆಡ್ ದಟ್ ಥಾಮಸ್ ಮುನ್ರೋ ರೈತವಾರಿ ಸಿಸ್ಟಮ್ ಇಂಟ್ರೊಡ್ಯೂಸ್ಡ್ ಮಾಡಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥದ್ದು ನೀವು ಸೆಡ್, ಬಟ್ ಅಲಾಂಗ್ ವಿತ್ ದಟ್ ದ ಡಿಮೆರಿಟ್ಸ್ ಆಫ್ ದಟ್ ರೈತವಾರಿ ಸಿಸ್ಟಮ್ ಇಸ್ ಆಲ್ಸೋ ರೆಫರ್ಡ್. ಬಟ್ ದ ಥಿಂಗ್ ಈಸ್ when the Raitwari system introduced by Thomas Munro, so that is revenue system was it immediately jumped a very high rate. So what was the consequences in the South Canada? How the peasants of these regions respond to that jumping of the revenue system? Was there any resistance? Was there any strike? Was the people were resist this kind of Raitwari system?
In the initial years of the colonial administration, Munro had kept the revenue, state revenue, lower than that of Tipu Sultan. He was very cautious in raising the revenue more than that of Tipu Sultan. But slowly, as it happened in the rest of the country, here also during the colonial regime, the most important objective of the system was to increase the revenue share of the state. As Professor Irfan Habib has rightly studied and remarked, the colonial authorities were always interested in the maximization of land revenue in India. This particular observation that he has made holds good to the region of South Canara also. So collector after collector and year after year, as decades passed by, we see that there was a gradual increase in the collection of revenue. And when there was increase in the collection of revenue, there were also other problems. Other problems like, for example, market fluctuations. So many times, particularly towards the end of the first decade of the 19th century, then beginning of the fourth decade of the 19th century, there was an economic depression. And 1830s saw economic depression in the whole of the Madras presidency. Scholars like Sharada Raju and others, they have studied about depression in the Madras presidency itself. Along with that, there were other issues like monopoly introduced by the government. Then there was the changes introduced in judiciary and police. There was the system of law courts. There was system of stamp paper. All these made the lives of people rather difficult. As a result, peasants resented. Peasants opposed the regime. They wanted the assessment to be brought down. And such peasant reactions could be seen in 1810, 1811, in 1830, 31. And again, they also played a very important role during the rebellion of Kalyana Swami in 1837. Though these were some 3 instances wherein they revolted, always in the primary sources, we can see that the peasants were unhappy. There was always exploitation. There was over-assessment. And it was a miserable scene.
Now I request this session president, Dr. Uday Kumar, to deliver his presidential speech.
Good evening to all of you. It's very great to see Professor Shambat. I was their contemporary during 81-83 in the Mangalore University. Perhaps formally we are meeting at a virtual space after 38 years. It's a great feeling. It's always exciting to know the historical development of any region, especially when we grope with certain issues during the present. Of course, history is to be understood not to rewrite it, but to build a healthy future. But what I was able to note, the kind of details that you were providing throughout your lecture, some of the very good insights into the areas, like the kind of situation that we had during the pre-colonial period. There was a lot of fluidity and there was a lot of flexibility in various walks of life, be it in cultural practices, be it in administration, be it in the religious practices. But once came under the grip of the colonial administration, which called for defining certain areas, it was necessary from the point of view of the convenience of the colonial administrative powers. And that has actually created the problem. At the same time, it also opened up certain areas of opportunities for the natives, for which we could contest based on the merits. And as such, it looked very attractive. Say, for example, the kind of education system that was brought in, the kind of administration or the kind of democratic values that were talked about. It's very interesting, but at the same time, it somewhere put us into the molds designed by the colonial powers, because it is always a struggle for power. That is, who is going to exercise power over the others. So it is the colonial powers which had the control over the natives. And even after the independence, and even after we achieved independence, we have not been able to get ourselves liberated, in the sense we are connected to a broader world. So we have a global power structure now. Even though we are independent, even though we are an independent and autonomous country as a nation, but if you look at the economic structure that we have at the global level, perhaps we are still stuck over there. And I think that it provided me an opportunity to think of all these areas, and it was quite exciting to listen to you. And I think that some of you may share my ideas after listening to Professor Shambat. I congratulate the efforts of the Department of History and Archaeology of a college, which has been doing a good job. And in fact, our job is to encourage debates, dialogues, and make our students to search for more sources, so that we are not able to understand and analyze the problems properly. Of course, nothing can be defined, because the time is something which always keeps changing, and so also the society. But it is very important that we need to think consciously to move towards a better society in the future. And I hope this lecture series is a good step in that particular direction. I was able to meet many of my friends over here. I was excited to listen to Dr. Ganapati Pundikaya Ganapaya Bhatt, who was my colleague one time, and who is a very serious researcher and a very active teacher, and he is the real motivator for the teachers today. I thank the department once again. Professor Shambat, we are really indebted to you for having spared your valuable time and enlightened the teaching fraternity and the research scholars over here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your presidential speech. Now we are coming to the end of the session. I request Raksha to deliver her vote of thanks.
ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾನಿಲಯ ಕಾಲೇಜು ಮಂಗಳೂರು ಇತಿಹಾಸ ಮತ್ತು ಪುರಾತತ್ವ ಶಾಸ್ತ್ರ ಸ್ನಾತಕೋತ್ತರ ವಿಭಾಗ ಮತ್ತು ಇತಿಹಾಸ ಶಿಕ್ಷಕರ ಸಂಘ ಮಾನುಷ ಜಂಟಿಯಾಗಿ ಯಶಸ್ವಿಯಾಗಿ ಆಯೋಜಿಸಿಕೊಂಡು ಬರುತ್ತಿರುವ ತುಳುನಾಡಿನ ಮತ್ತು ಕೊಡಗಿನ ಇತಿಹಾಸ ಎಂಬ ವಿಷಯದ ಕುರಿತು ವೆಬಿನಾರ್ ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸದ 13ನೇ ಸರಣಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವಿಂದು ಸೇರಿದ್ದೇವೆ. ತುಳುನಾಡು ಆರಂಭಿಕ ವಸಾಹತುಶಾಹಿ ಕಾಲದ ಮರುವ್ಯಾಖ್ಯಾನ ಎಂಬ ವಿಷಯದ ಕುರಿತಂತೆ ಸುವಿಸ್ತಾರವಾದ ಮಾಹಿತಿಯನ್ನು ನಮ್ಮ ಮುಂದಿಟ್ಟು ನಮ್ಮ ಈ ವೆಬಿನಾರ್ ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸಕ್ಕೆ ಸಂಪನ್ಮೂಲ ವ್ಯಕ್ತಿಯಾಗಿ ಆಗಮಿಸಿದ ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ಎನ್ ಶ್ಯಾಂಭಟ್ ಸರ್, ನಿವೃತ್ತ ಪ್ರಾಂಶುಪಾಲರು, ಇತಿಹಾಸ ವಿಭಾಗ, ಗೋವಾ ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾನಿಲಯ, ಇವರಿಗೆ ಕಾಲೇಜಿನ ಪರವಾಗಿ ಹಾಗೂ ನಮ್ಮ ವಿಭಾಗದ ಪರವಾಗಿ ಹೃತ್ಪೂರ್ವಕ ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳನ್ನು ಸಲ್ಲಿಸುತ್ತೇನೆ. ಹಾಗೆಯೇ ಈ ವೆಬಿನಾರ್ ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸದ ಅಧ್ಯಕ್ಷತೆಯನ್ನು ವಹಿಸಿರುವ ಹಾಗೂ ನಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮಗಳಿಗೂ ಬೆನ್ನೆಲುಬಾಗಿ ಪ್ರೋತ್ಸಾಹಿಸುತ್ತಿರುವ ನಮ್ಮ ಕಾಲೇಜಿನ ಗೌರವಾನ್ವಿತ ಪ್ರಾಂಶುಪಾಲರಾದ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಅನಸೂಯ ರೈ ಮೇಡಂ, ನಿಮಗೂ ತುಂಬು ಹೃದಯದ ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು. ವೆಬಿನಾರ್ ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮ ಯಶಸ್ವಿಯಾಗಲು ಕಾರಣೀಕರ್ತರಾದ ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾನಿಲಯ ಕಾಲೇಜು ಮಂಗಳೂರು ಇತಿಹಾಸ ಮತ್ತು ಪುರಾತತ್ವ ಶಾಸ್ತ್ರ ವಿಭಾಗದ ಸಂಯೋಜಕರು ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಗಣಪತಿ ಗೌಡ ಸರ್, ನಿಮಗೂ ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು. ಅದೇ ರೀತಿ ವಿಭಾಗದ ಎಲ್ಲಾ ಅಧ್ಯಾಪಕರುಗಳಿಗೂ ಕೃತಜ್ಞತೆಯನ್ನು ಸಲ್ಲಿಸುತ್ತಿದ್ದೇನೆ. ಅದೇ ರೀತಿ ಮಾನುಷದ ಅಧ್ಯಕ್ಷರು, ಕಾರ್ಯದರ್ಶಿಗಳು, ಪದಾಧಿಕಾರಿಗಳಿಗೂ ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು. ನಮ್ಮ ಈ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮಕ್ಕೆ ತಾಂತ್ರಿಕ ಸಹಕಾರ ನೀಡುತ್ತಿರುವ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಸಿದ್ದರಾಜ್ ಸರ್, ಸಸ್ಯಶಾಸ್ತ್ರ ವಿಭಾಗ, ನಿಮಗೂ ವಂದನೆಗಳು. ನಮ್ಮ ಈ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮವನ್ನು ಯೂಟ್ಯೂಬ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರಸಾರ ಮಾಡುತ್ತಿರುವ ನಮ್ಮ ಕಾಲೇಜಿನ ಪತ್ರಿಕೋದ್ಯಮ ವಿಭಾಗದ ಗುರುಪ್ರಸಾದ್ ಸರ್ ನಿಮಗೂ ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು. ಹಾಗೆಯೇ ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮದಲ್ಲಿ ಭಾಗವಹಿಸಿದ ಎಲ್ಲ ವಿದ್ಯಾರ್ಥಿನಿಯರಿಗೂ ಹಾಗೂ ಕಾಲೇಜಿನ ಇತರ ವಿಭಾಗಗಳ ಅಧ್ಯಾಪಕರಿಗೂ, ಈ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮದಲ್ಲಿ ಭಾಗವಹಿಸಿದ ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ, ಅದೇ ರೀತಿ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮವು ಅತ್ಯಂತ ಯಶಸ್ವಿಯಾಗಿ ಮೂಡಿಬರಲು ಪ್ರತ್ಯಕ್ಷ ಮತ್ತು ಪರೋಕ್ಷವಾಗಿ ಸಹಕರಿಸಿದ ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಹೃತ್ಪೂರ್ವಕ ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳನ್ನು ಹೇಳುತ್ತಾ ನನ್ನ ಧನ್ಯವಾದ ಭಾಷಣವನ್ನು ಕೊನೆಗೊಳಿಸುತ್ತೇನೆ. ಅವಕಾಶಕ್ಕಾಗಿ ವಂದನೆಗಳು.
ಕ್ಷಮೆ ಇರಲಿ, ನಮ್ಮ ಇವತ್ತಿನ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮದ ಅಧ್ಯಕ್ಷತೆಯನ್ನು ವಹಿಸಿಕೊಂಡಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂತಹ ಉದಯ್ ಕುಮಾರ್ ಅವರನ್ನು ನಮ್ಮ ವಿದ್ಯಾರ್ಥಿನಿ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಸೊ ಮಾನ್ಯ ಪೂರ್ವತನ ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾಲಯ ಕಾಲೇಜಿನ ಪೂರ್ವತನ ಪ್ರಾಂಶುಪಾಲರಾಗಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಉದಯ್ ಕುಮಾರ್ ಅವರಿಗೆ ನಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲರ ಪರವಾಗಿ ಹಾರ್ದಿಕವಾಗಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳನ್ನ ಅರ್ಪಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೇನೆ.
ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು ಸರ್.
ರಕ್ಷಾ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಧನ್ಯವಾದ ಸಲ್ಲಿಸ್ತಾ, ಎಲ್ಲರ ಪರವಾಗಿ ಮತ್ತೊಮ್ಮೆ ಶ್ಯಾಮ್ ಭಟ್ರು ಅವರಿಗೆ, ಉದಯ್ ಕುಮಾರ್ ಸರ್ ಅವರಿಗೆ, ಗಣಪತಿ ಸರ್ ಅವರಿಗೆ, ಇವರೆಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಧನ್ಯವಾದವನ್ನ ಸಲ್ಲಿಸ್ತಾ ಈ 13ನೇ ಸಂಚಿಕೆಯನ್ನ ಇಲ್ಲಿಗೆ ಮುಗಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೇವೆ. 14ನೇ ಸಂಚಿಕೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಮತ್ತೊಮ್ಮೆ ಭೇಟಿ ಮಾಡೋಣ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ ಈ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮಕ್ಕೆ ಅಂತ್ಯವನ್ನ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೇನೆ. ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ.